Tonight, we drift back through the mists of history, across moonlit waters and far-off horizons, to follow the wake of a man whose fleets were so vast, so magnificent, that entire kingdoms watched in awe as they approached. Tonight we sail beside Zheng He, the great admiral of the Ming Dynasty, an explorer whose colossal treasure ships glided over the oceans like floating palaces, carrying gifts, wonders, and tales across continents. And somewhere in those silent waves a spark of mystery lingers, a hint that the world was far more connected, far more wondrous than most ever imagined. Before we begin this gentle voyage, I'd like to invite you, wherever you are watching from, whether it's morning in the U.S., a quiet afternoon in Europe, or a peaceful late night in Canada, or anywhere else around this beautiful world, to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Let me know what time it is for you and where you have set sail from tonight. Now, take a slow breath, adjust your pillows, dim the lights, allow yourself to settle into calm waters. The story is ready to begin and the sea is smooth beneath us. When you are comfortable, we will slip gently into the first chapter of this journey, the rise of a young boy who would one day command the greatest fleet the world had ever known. In the soft dawn light of Kunyang, long before Zheng He became an admiral whose name would echo across oceans, he was simply a boy walking along the terraced fields of Yunnan. The morning mist clung to the mountains like thin silk, drifting in slow curls around the narrow stone paths. Roosters called from distant farmyards, and somewhere nearby a wooden bucket creaked as water was drawn from a well. The scent of damp earth rose gently from the fields, mingling with the faint sweetness of wildflowers tucked beneath river stones. Young Ma He, this would be his name before history renamed him, moved with quiet, thoughtful steps, watching the world with wide, curious eyes. He listened to everything, the wind brushing through bamboo groves, the faint splash of carp breaking the surface of a pond, the murmur of travelers telling of distant places he had never seen. He had always loved stories of the world beyond Yunnan's mountains. Traders spoke of deserts that stretched like golden oceans, of cities where towers shone in the sun, and of real oceans, vast, restless, and as mysterious as the night sky. Though he was young, he felt something stirring inside him whenever he heard these tales, a soft pull toward the horizon he could not yet name. But the world was changing around him, and fate, quiet as a shadow, was already moving toward the boy who would one day command a fleet that could carry entire towns upon its decks. War approached Yunnan, bringing with it soldiers, banners, and the rumbling uncertainty of shifting dynasties. And in those early days, Mahi's calm, bright childhood lay on the edge of transformation. Still, on that peaceful morning, he could not yet see the storms ahead. He heard only the quiet music of his village, the river's slow rhythm, the gentle hum of life, and the soft beating of dreams that would one day lead him to the sea. The path that led Ma He away from his quiet village began beneath a sky the color of pale smoke. Dust rose beneath the feet of soldiers as they marched through Yunnan, their armor clinking softly like distant wind chimes. Though their arrival marked the end of his childhood, the air around young Ma He remained strangely calm, as if the mountains themselves were whispering reassurance. He walked with the others, captives, travelers, and families displaced by shifting tides of power, along a winding road that cut through valleys filled with fog. The mornings were cool, carrying the scent of pine resin and wet soil, while the afternoons warmed slowly, sunlight creeping across the high ridges like golden fingers. At night the group rested beneath open skies. Ma He would lie awake, listening to the crackle of campfires and the soft snores of exhausted travelers. Overhead the stars were scattered like silver grains, bright enough to reflect faintly in the puddles left by afternoon rain. He studied them with a quiet fascination, tracing patterns as if mapping the invisible roots of a world he had yet to discover. The soldiers were stern but not cruel. Some spoke in low voices of the capital, Nanjing, a place so vast and vibrant it seemed to hum with life. They described markets overflowing with spices and silk, palaces rising like mountains carved by human hands, and ships so large they carried entire crews across rivers wider than anything Ma He had imagined. Though he did not yet know it, Nanjing would become the city where his destiny shifted, where he would rise from captive to trusted servant, and then to a man entrusted with missions that spanned the breadth of the known world. But on this long road, he was still a boy walking through the quiet rhythm of days, morning frost, afternoon dust, evening firelight, each step carrying him farther from his village and closer to the horizon that had always called to him. Nanjing greeted Ma He with a soft haze rising from the river and the distant hum of a city awakening. Even before he stepped within its walls, he felt the air shift, filled with the mingled scents of jasmine tea, lacquered wood, and spices carried from distant provinces. The young boy, who had grown up among terraced hills and quiet ponds, now found himself standing before the Ming capital, where wide avenues unfurled like ribbons and the rooftops of palaces shimmered beneath the sun. He entered through towering gates carved with dragons, their stone bodies coiled in waves of cloud. Every sound seemed amplified here, the rhythmic clatter of carts, the call of merchants preparing their stalls, the distant echo of drums marking the start of a new day. Servants moved briskly through the palace courtyards, their silk robes rustling like leaves in a quickening breeze. For Ma He, the palace was a place of many doors, some literal, some unseen. There were doors he passed through as part of his duties, storerooms that smelled of cedar and parchment, kitchens alive with steam and the aroma of simmering broths, gardens where koi moved in slow circles beneath lotus leaves. And then there were the doors of possibility, which opened quietly, almost without notice. Here he learned to observe before speaking, to listen with care, and to carry himself with a calm dignity that drew the attention of those above him. His intelligence did not shine loudly. It glowed like a lantern in fog, steady and unmistakable. Word of the thoughtful young boy with the sharp eyes eventually reached the court of the Yongle Emperor, a ruler with a vision as wide as the oceans he hoped one day to command. And so, while Ma He did not yet know the shape of his future, the palace was already preparing a path for him, one that wound through corridors of red lacquer, across the echoing halls of the inner court, and ultimately toward the sea he had never seen, but had always felt somewhere deep within. The palace was vast, but destiny walked beside him like a quiet companion, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The day Ma. He first glimpsed the emperor's grand ambitions. The palace felt unusually still, as if holding its breath. A faint mist drifted above the stone courtyards, softening the sharp lines of rooftops and curling like pale ribbons around red pillars. Lanterns swayed gently in the early light, their glow muted but steady, giving the palace an air of suspended anticipation. Ma He had been summoned to assist a senior official in a quiet administrative hall. There scrolls lay unrolled across long wooden tables, each one filled with ink strokes describing far-off lands, tribute missions, and fragments of stories brought by merchants who had crossed oceans. He studied the unfamiliar names, Calicut, Hormuz, Malacca, letting the syllables settle into his mind like seeds waiting for rain. As he worked, voices from an adjacent chamber drifted through the half-open doors. The tone was low, purposeful. Advisors spoke of reopening old trade routes, of forging alliances abroad, of projecting the Ming Dynasty's power far beyond the shores of the Middle Kingdom. They spoke, too, of the emperor's desire to send ships, enormous ships, across seas so wide they seemed to merge with the sky. Mahi felt something tighten inside him, a quiet spark flaring into a steady glow. He leaned closer to the scrolls before him, imagining ships the size of fortresses gliding across the horizon, their sails catching winds, scented with salt and distant spices. Though he said nothing aloud, something in him answered the call of those discussions, as if recognizing a path that had always been waiting. The senior official watched him with a thoughtful expression. It was this calm focus, this quiet strength, that had brought Mahi to the attention of the court. And soon the emperor himself, Yongle, ambitious and far-reaching in thought, would notice the young man capable of balancing discipline with curiosity. In those days, the emperor's vision was only a collection of plans and possibilities inked onto scrolls. But he sensed that history rarely began with grand gestures. It began here, in still rooms filled with whispered ideas and the faint scent of fresh ink. Beyond the palace walls, the river stirred. The wind shifted slightly, as if the oceans themselves were waiting. Days in the palace unfolded like silk, being slowly unrolled, quiet, smooth, and filled with patient discipline. As Mahi grew into adulthood, each year added a layer of strength and steadiness to his presence. He walked with a calm authority, his steps measured, his gaze sharp yet compassionate. Those around him sensed that he carried something rare, a balance of humility and unwavering resolve. Training became a central part of his life. In the palace courtyards, he learned the art of diplomacy, how to speak with grace, how to read the intentions hidden behind smiles, how to stand firm without raising his voice. He learned strategy, too, studying maps inked with the shapes of continents he had yet to see, tracing coastlines where foreign sails once drifted like ghosts on the horizon. And when he learned the ways of command, how to lead men, how to maintain order, how to carry responsibility without faltering, he accepted each lesson with a quiet seriousness. Those who trained alongside him often found comfort in his presence. He was a man who could stand in the middle of a storm and still breathe steadily, like a mountain rooted deep in the earth. Years passed, and the palace officials began to speak of him with respect. He rose from servant to trusted commander, serving the emperor with a loyalty that was as constant as the river that flowed beyond Nanjing's walls. It was this loyalty that caught the emperor's eye. Yongle was a ruler with dreams as vast as the horizon, and he sought someone capable of carrying those dreams across the world. One evening, as the sun cast gold across the palace roofs, Mahi was summoned to a private audience. The emperor studied him with the gaze of a man choosing the bearer of great destiny. In his voice was both command and trust. He spoke of fleets that would dwarf any the world had ever seen, ships taller than palaces, decks wide enough for garden courtyards, vessels built not for conquest, but for diplomacy, exploration, and the forging of peaceful alliances. And he needed a leader, a guiding hand steady enough to navigate rough seas and delicate negotiations alike. In that quiet, monumental moment, Mahi felt the world shift. The road that had once taken him from Yunnan's mist-covered hills now stretched toward the open ocean. He would become Zheng He, the admiral, whose legacy would ride upon the waves. Destiny no longer waited behind a closed door. It stood before him, vast and deep as the sea. The shoreline near Nanjing transformed slowly, like a dream taking shape beneath the hands of thousands. What had once been a quiet stretch of riverbank now trembled with the rhythmic pulse of hammers, saws, and shouted commands. Woodworkers, rope makers, metalsmiths, and sailors moved in organized currents, each contributing to a creation so immense that even nature seemed to pause and watch. The treasure fleet was being born. Massive logs, hauled from distant forests, lay stacked like sleeping giants along the docks. The scent of fresh timber hung in the air, blending with the earthy aroma of river mud and the faint sweetness of tar. Workers soaked ropes in vats of oil until they glistened like polished serpents. Sheets of canvas dried in the sun, rustling gently, waiting to become sails wide enough to catch winds from half a world away. Zheng He walked among the shipyards with a measured, attentive stride. Though he had seen sketches and models, nothing prepared him for the scale of what the emperor envisioned. Hulls rose higher than city walls, curving upward like the ribs of colossal beasts. The largest ships, Beoquan or treasure ships, were so vast that standing upon their unfinished decks felt like standing on the foundation of a floating palace. He touched the wooden railings, feeling the warmth of sun-soaked planks beneath his fingers. Each ship carried promise, of journeys yet unmade, of distant horizons waiting to be crossed, of friendships that might bloom across oceans. He envisioned caravans of sails moving in harmony, shimmering white against the deep blue expanse, carrying silk, porcelain, and the goodwill of the Ming Dynasty. But construction was only part of the preparation. Camps nearby trained thousands of sailors, navigators, interpreters, soldiers, cooks, physicians, and scholars. The shoreline became a world unto itself, a humming, vital landscape where every man and woman played a role in shaping the greatest fleet ever assembled. At dusk, the river reflected the glow of lanterns hung from scaffolding. Tiny points of golden light danced upon the water, mirroring the stars beginning to appear overhead. Zheng He stood by the shore, watching the sky darken as ships took shape before him, their silhouettes vast and steady. The fleet was no longer just an imperial command. It was a living thing, breathing with purpose. Soon it would carry him beyond everything he had known. The sea was calling. At dawn, the river was a ribbon of pale silver, quiet and almost reverent as it embraced the hulls of the great treasure ships. Mist drifted low across the water, swirling gently around the immense vessels, as if reluctant to let them go. As the sun climbed slowly over the horizon, its light spread in soft, golden layers, spilling across the decks and illuminating the carved prows that pointed toward lands far beyond imagination. Zheng He stood upon the lead treasure ship, its deck broad and steady beneath his feet. The faint scent of polished wood mingled with the briny breath of the river. Around him, the ship hummed with preparation, sailors adjusting rigging, navigators checking star charts, translators organizing scrolls of foreign phrases. The air was filled with purposeful movement, yet everything maintained a calm, rhythmic flow. Below deck, storerooms brimmed with the Empire's finest offerings, silk that shimmered like liquid moonlight, porcelain painted with delicate dragons, gold-threaded tapestries, herbal medicines, and gifts crafted by skilled hands from every corner of the Ming Dynasty. These were not the tools of conquest, but of connection, bridges meant to span oceans. As the final inspections were completed, Zheng He closed his eyes for a moment and felt the heartbeat of the ship beneath him. It was steady, powerful, and alive. The wind brushed his face gently, cool and salt-tinged, carrying with it the distant cry of a seabird. Even though they had not yet reached the open ocean, the taste of it lingered in the air like a promise. Slowly, drums began to sound along the riverbanks, deep, resonant beats that rolled across the water like distant thunder. It was the signal. Sailors took their positions, oars dipped into the river in perfect synchronization, and then, with a long exhale of canvas, the treasure ships unfurled their sails. White cloth billowed outward, catching the morning wind with a soft, powerful sigh. The fleet began to glide downstream, each ship moving with graceful certainty. People gathered along the shore, watching silently, some in awe, some in pride, some in quiet worry for loved ones embarking toward the unknown. Children waved small cloth flags. Elders bowed respectfully as the fleet passed, like witnessing the turning of a new chapter in the Empire's story. Zheng He watched the shoreline slowly recede, the familiar shapes of Nanjing softening into memory. Ahead lay seas he had only imagined, places marked on maps with gentle strokes of ink, and stories waiting to be lived. The river widened, and the wind carried them forward. The world was opening. When the treasure fleet finally reached the open sea, the world seemed to expand in every direction. The river's gentle currents gave way to the vast rhythm of the ocean, its surface rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. The water stretched so far that it blurred into the sky, creating a horizon so seamless that it felt like the fleet was gliding along the edge of the world itself. The air changed, too, becoming saltier, fresher, tinged with the distant scent of storms and faraway shores. The wind carried a deep rolling hum from the waves below, a lullaby as ancient as the earth. Zheng He stood at the ship's prow, feeling the deck sway softly beneath him, steady yet alive. Some sailors found the motion dizzying at first, but soon their bodies adjusted, rocking in quiet harmony with the sea's pulse. Days unfolded gently, one after another. The sun rose in warm golds and softened into cool blues as it sank each evening. During the daytime, the sky was clearer than any Zheng He had ever seen, so wide that even the largest treasure ships seemed small against its expanse. At night, when the lanterns were dimmed and the deck fell quiet, the stars scattered overhead in brilliant clusters, shining so brightly that they reflected on the water like a second sky. Navigators read those constellations like a sacred script. They traced lines between stars, calculating distances, studying the moon's slow arc. Zheng He often joined them, listening to their gentle explanations, their voices soft, respectful of the night's stillness. The ocean, he realized, had its own language. Its winds, its currents, its tides, all of them spoke to those who were patient enough to listen. Life aboard the ship settled into a calm rhythm. Meals of rice, dried fish, and warm broth were shared beneath flapping canvas awnings. Scholars discussed foreign histories while sipping tea made from leaves carried from the emperor's gardens. Young sailors practiced knots and listened wide-eyed to older men who told stories of storms survived and shores glimpsed only once. Yet for all its tranquility, the ocean also carried mystery. On some mornings, a thin veil of fog drifted across the fleet, muffling every sound until even the splash of oars seemed distant and dreamlike. On others, dolphins appeared beside the ships, leaping gracefully through the waves as though guiding the fleet with joyful energy. Zheng He watched it all with a quiet, growing sense of purpose. He felt the world unfolding before him, vast, unfamiliar, yet deeply welcoming. This journey was not merely one of distance, it was a journey of understanding, of connection, of seeing how the world fit together like pieces of a great ever-changing tapestry. And somewhere beyond the horizon, their first destination waited, shimmering like a promise carried on the wind. Weeks at sea passed in a gentle rhythmic flow until one warm morning a faint shape appeared along the horizon, first only a smudge of darker blue, then slowly unfolding into the soft rising outline of palm-covered hills. The scent of land drifted toward the fleet on a warm breeze, fragrant with unfamiliar flowers and hints of burning spices. The sailors leaned over the rails, murmuring with quiet wonder as the world of open water gave way to the colors and contours of a distant shore. As the treasure ships glided closer, the coastline revealed lively ports and villages where thatched roofs gleamed in the sunlight. Fishing boats dotted the shallows, their sails painted in bright hues, reds, yellows, and deep greens that fluttered like the wings of tropical birds. The water near the harbor sparkled a luminous turquoise, so clear that the fleet could see schools of silver fish weaving through coral forests beneath their hulls. Zheng He stood at the bow, watching the harbor of Malacca come into view. It was a place spoken of with respect in the Ming court, a crossroads of the seas where merchants from India, Arabia, Africa, and Southeast Asia met to trade stories and treasures. Even from a distance, the port hummed with life. Smoke curled lazily from market stalls. Drums echoed faintly from the shoreline. People gathered along the docks, shading their eyes to gaze upon the approaching giants of the fleet. When the treasure ships anchored, a gentle hush fell over the harbor. Never before had Malacca seen vessels of such size, ships with decks wide as courtyards and masts rising like forest trees. Children pointed in awe, elders murmured blessings, and traders whispered among themselves, trying to guess what kind of empire could build such floating palaces. Zheng He descended with a procession of interpreters, scholars, and envoys bearing gifts wrapped in silk. The air was warm and fragrant, full of cloves, coconut oil, and the sweetness of ripe fruit. He walked across the docks calmly with the dignity of a man who came not as a conqueror, but as a guest. The Sultan's representatives greeted him with respectful bows, their robes shimmering in the bright morning light. Conversations unfolded in shaded pavilions where cool breezes stirred hanging tapestries. Gift after gift was exchanged, porcelain gleaming like moonlight, embroidered robes, scrolls painted with landscapes of distant Chinese mountains. In return, Malacca offered its own treasures, aromatic spices, carvings of rare woods, and knowledge of sea routes that stretched far beyond the horizon. At night, lanterns flickered along the harbor, their reflections drifting like fireflies across the water. Musicians played soft, lilting melodies while dancers moved with slow, fluid grace. Zheng He watched these gatherings with thoughtful serenity, grateful for the harmony weaving itself between cultures. For this was the heart of his mission, not simply to explore, but to build bridges across oceans, to show that the world's vastness was not a barrier, but a connection waiting to be shaped. The fleet had many shores yet to visit, many kingdoms to greet, many friendships to form, and the seas ahead shimmered with possibility. The days that followed unfolded in a gentle, harmonious rhythm, each one marked by the quiet exchange of gifts and stories between the treasure fleet and the kingdoms they visited. As the ships journeyed onward from Malacca to new shores, toward India's fragrant coasts, the bustling markets of Calicut, and the ancient harbors of Sri Lanka, the world began to reveal itself as a tapestry woven with vibrant colors, soft voices, and shared hopes. Each port welcomed the fleet differently, yet with a similar sense of wonder. In Calicut, warm winds carried the scent of pepper and cardamom through the air, swirling around pavilions where traders displayed fabrics dyed in deep indigo and bright saffron. Elephants adorned in gold-threaded cloths walked serenely along the beaches, their footsteps soft as drumbeats in the sand. Zheng He, calm and steady, offered gifts from the Ming Dynasty, porcelain bowls painted with mountains and rivers, silk that shimmered like flowing water, and scrolls bearing messages of friendship. In return, the people of Calicut presented the fleet with spices, jewels, and rare woods. But the most precious exchange was not material. It was the knowledge, descriptions of far-off lands, ancient navigational wisdom, and stories passed down from sailors who had crossed oceans long before the treasure ships set sail. Further along the coasts of the Indian Ocean, musicians played melodies unlike any Zheng He had heard before, their rhythms lively and bright. Priests offered blessings in temples scented with incense, and scholars shared their writings beneath carved stone arches. Everywhere the fleet traveled, bridges were formed, some fragile and temporary, others strong and lasting. Back aboard the ships, the storerooms filled gradually with wonders collected from across the seas. Jars of spices warm to the touch, gemstones that caught the lantern light and scattered it in soft glimmers, carvings shaped by hands far from the empire's borders. Yet what mattered more than the objects themselves was the sense of connection they represented, proof that the world was wide, yes, but also welcoming. On quiet evenings, Zheng He would walk the upper decks, listening to the murmur of waves against the hull. Lanterns swung gently overhead as sailors shared stories from the lands they had seen. Some spoke of the kindness of hosts. Others described foods rich with flavors impossible to find at home. The air carried traces of everything they had encountered: salt, spice, fruit, and the lingering warmth of distant sunlit shores. Zheng He felt a deep, steady calm settle within him. Each new friendship strengthened the purpose of their voyage, to show that oceans, though vast, could be paths rather than barriers. And with every league traveled, the sea seemed to whisper that there were still more wonders waiting just beyond the horizon. The ocean, so often calm and welcoming, eventually reminded the fleet of its deeper, older power. It began with a change in the wind, a low, mournful sigh that stirred the sails in restless motions. Clouds gathered on the horizon, stacking themselves in dark, heavy layers like mountains rising out of the sea. The water shifted from turquoise to a deep steel blue, its surface trembling with the promise of a storm. Zheng He stood at the helm of the lead treasure ship, watching the sky thicken. His expression remained serene, though his eyes sharpened with focus. He knew that storms were not enemies, they were lessons. And he had learned long ago that the sea's voice grew loudest when it wished to test the resolve of those who traveled upon it. As the first rumble of thunder rolled across the waves, sailors moved swiftly into position. Ropes were tightened, sails furled, and lanterns secured. The wind arrived in sudden bursts, cool and biting, carrying the scent of rain and distant lightning. Moments later, the sky split open. Rain fell in sweeping sheets, drumming against the decks with a steady, unrelenting rhythm. Waves rose higher, lifting the massive ships as though they were small toys in the hands of a giant. The fleet swayed and creaked, wood singing under pressure, yet the treasure ships held strong, built with care, designed for the fiercest waters. Zheng He moved calmly through the storm, offering quiet instructions, steadying hands, and a presence that anchored even the most anxious sailor. His voice, low but firm, carried through the wind. Steady the rudders, watch the swells, breathe with the ship, not against it. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the fleet for an instant. Masts leaning into the wind, sails tightly secured, waves curling like great silver beasts in the dark. But just as quickly as the light came, darkness followed, thick and quiet, except for the roar of the storm. Hours passed, though they felt like days. Eventually the thunder softened, the waves grew gentler, and the rain thinned into a mist that hung delicately in the air. The sea, having made its point, seemed to exhale and return to its earlier rhythm. As dawn broke, a warm glow spread across the water, turning it gold and rose-colored. The ocean looked smooth again, as if the storm had been nothing more than a passing dream. Sailors emerged onto the deck, blinking in the new light, breathing in the fresh calm that followed chaos. Zheng He looked out over the quiet sea, feeling gratitude rise within him. Storms, like challenges in life, came and went. What mattered was how one weathered them, with patience, unity, and an unwavering trust in the journey. The fleet sailed on, stronger than before. After the storm's retreat, the ocean once again guided the treasure fleet toward warmer winds and distant shores. Their next great encounter awaited in the ancient port of Calicut, where merchants from Africa, Arabia, and India mingled in a lively dance of languages and colors. The harbor bustled with life, voices calling in greeting, sails snapping in the breeze, spices carried through the air like drifting fire. Zheng He had visited Calicut before, yet each return felt new. The city shimmered beneath the sun, its whitewashed buildings rising gently from the coastline, while palm trees swayed as if welcoming old friends. Envoys from across distant kingdoms had traveled there to meet the fleet, drawn by stories of the floating palaces from the east. Among these envoys was a delegation from the kingdom of Bengal, and with them they brought a gift unlike any the Ming court had ever seen, an animal tall as a house, with legs like carved pillars and a neck that rose gracefully skyward. Its patterned coat shone gold and brown in the sunlight, and its eyes were deep and gentle, reflecting the world with soft curiosity. A giraffe. Gasps rippled among the sailors as they witnessed the creature step from its enclosure onto the docks. Some whispered blessings under their breath, others leaned forward in awe, and a few simply stood frozen, unable to believe such an extraordinary animal lived anywhere in the world. Sailors who had faced storms and crossed oceans now found themselves humbled by a creature that moved with quiet elegance, as if made from starlight and earth. Zheng He approached with calm reverence. The giraffe bent its long neck slightly, blinking slowly, its breath warm and sweet, like grass after rain. Interpreters explained that in distant lands, people spoke of the animal as if it were a celestial messenger, a sign of prosperity, peace and harmony between kingdoms. The admiral's heart warmed. Here before him was more than a rare creature. It was a symbol of what the voyage stood for: bridges built across vast distances, friendships formed where none had existed, and wonders shared freely among nations. The giraffe would join the treasures meant for the Yongle emperor, who adored marvels from foreign lands. It was said the emperor believed in the unity of heaven and earth, and this gentle creature, with its head seemingly reaching for the sky, would surely be seen as an omen of good fortune. As evening fell, lanterns cast soft light across the docks. Musicians played gentle rhythms as the giraffe rested peacefully in its shaded enclosure, swaying like a tall tree in a slow breeze. Sailors gathered around, speaking in hushed tones, marveling at the gift they would carry home across the ocean. Zheng He looked out at the sea, calm and endless under the dusk sky. Their journey was nearing its return, but its purpose felt more profound than ever. This voyage had shown the world not in fragments, but in connection, kingdom to kingdom, hand to hand, heart to heart. Yet one final chapter awaited them. The treasure fleet began its long journey home beneath a sky streaked with gentle shades of lavender and peach. The evening air was warm and still, carrying the sense of distant shores now fading into memory, spices, blossoms, and the sweetness of unfamiliar fruit. The ocean beneath the ships glimmered like brushed bronze, smooth and steady, as if guiding them back toward the heart of the empire. On the lead ship, Zheng He stood quietly at the railing, watching the horizon soften into twilight. Behind him, sailors moved with an easy familiarity, coiling ropes, securing crates, tending to the giraffe that swayed peacefully in its special enclosure. The creature's long neck rose above the ship's rail, its gentle eyes reflecting the colors of the setting sun. Below deck, storerooms were filled with gifts and wonders gathered from across the world. Spices still warm with their natural oils, intricately carved ivories, woven textiles dyed in shades stronger than sunset, and rare woods polished until they shone. Yet none of these treasures compared to what truly mattered: the bonds forged across oceans, the friendships sealed with open hands and honest words, the understanding that the world was vast, but its people not so different from one another. Days at sea passed with a calm, restful rhythm. The fleet moved like a single great creature, sails billowing softly, hulls gliding in harmony over gentle waves. At night, the stars shimmered more brightly than ever, as though guiding them home with celestial lanterns. Zheng He often paused to study them, reflecting on how each point of light was both distant and connected, much like the kingdoms they had visited. As the coastline of China finally appeared, it rose slowly from the morning mist, familiar and comforting. Villages dotted the shore, their rooftops catching the early sun. Fishermen paused in their small wooden boats, shading their eyes as the enormous treasure ships approached. Word traveled quickly inland, spreading excitement through towns and across the capital. The fleet, after months upon the open seas, had returned. When Zheng He stepped onto the docks of Nanjing, the air felt different, filled with pride, relief, and the quiet joy of homecoming. Crowds gathered to greet the sailors, offering cheers, flowers, and warm embraces. Drums sounded in deep, welcoming rhythms, echoing across the riverbanks. And then, as a final sign of peace and prosperity, the giraffe emerged onto Chinese soil. The crowd fell silent, awe rippling through them like wind across a field. With its long neck reaching skyward, the animal seemed almost to step out of myth, a living bridge between continents. It bowed its head gently, and this simple gesture brought smiles, tears, and whispers of good fortune. Zheng He felt a deep calm settle within him. The voyage had been long, filled with storms and wonder, hardship and harmony. Yet they had accomplished what they set out to do, not merely to explore the world, but to weave it together. And as the sun rose higher over the capital, painting the sky in gold, he knew that the seas would one day call again. But for now, the empire rested, the ships rested, and the admiral, his heart full, rested too. Thank you, dear traveler, for journeying across oceans with this soft, drifting tale of Zheng He and his magnificent treasure ships. May the calm of these waters stay with you as you settle into rest. If you enjoyed this soothing voyage, remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let me know where in the world you listen from, and what time of night or day it was for you. Now, close your eyes. Let the gentle rhythm of the waves carry your thoughts to peaceful places. May your dreams be wide as the ocean, warm as distant shores, and calm as the soft night surrounding you. Sleep well, traveler.